And now Hugh Laurie reads the final part of The Hound of the Baskervilles by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Sherlock Holmes is certain that the naturalist Stapleton, one of Sir Henry Baskerville's nearest neighbours, is responsible for the recent horrific events on Dartmoor, but he has yet to prove it.
In the morning, Holmes told Sir Henry that we had to return to London. The baronet's face perceptibly lengthened. "I hoped you were going to see me through this business." Holmes was firm. "My dear fellow, you must trust me implicitly and do exactly what I tell you. You're engaged, as I understand, to dine with our friends the Stapletons tonight. Tell them we should have been happy to come, but urgent business required us to be in town. One more direction. I wish you to drive to Meripit House this evening. Send back your trap, however, and let them know that you intend to walk home." "But walking across the moor is the very thing you've so often cautioned me not to do." "This time you may do it safely. If I hadn't every confidence in your courage, I wouldn't suggest it." I was much astounded by this programme. There was nothing for it, however, but implicit obedience. So we bade good-bye to our rueful friend, and a couple of hours afterwards we were at the station of Coombe Tracy. The boy who'd provided Holmes with provisions on the moor was waiting on the platform. "Any orders, sir?" "Take the train to town. The moment you arrive, send a wire to Sir Henry Baskerville, in my name, to say that if he finds the pocket-book which I've dropped, he's to send it to Baker Street." "Yes, sir." "Now, Watson, I think we cannot employ our time better than by calling upon Mrs. Laura Lyons." Holmes's plan of campaign was becoming clear. He was using the baronet to convince the Stapletons that we were really gone, while we'd actually return the instant we were needed. He opened his interview with Laura Lyons with a directness which considerably amazed her. "I'm investigating the circumstances which attended the death of Sir Charles Baskerville. You've confessed to Dr. Watson that you sent a letter asking Sir Charles to be at the gate at 10 o'clock. We know that was the place and hour of his death. You've withheld the connection between these events." She looked at him defiantly. "There is no connection. I wish to be perfectly frank with you, Mrs. Lyons. We regard this case as one of murder, and the evidence may implicate not only your friend, Mr. Stapleton, but his wife as well." The lady sprang from her chair. "His wife?" Holmes handed her some papers, and Mrs. Lyons resumed her seat to glance at them. Then she looked up with the set face of a desperate woman. "Mr. Holmes, this man had offered me marriage on condition that I could get a divorce from my husband. He's lied to me in every conceivable way. I see no reason to preserve faith with him who never kept any with me. You may ask what you like. One thing I swear to you is that when I wrote the letter I never dreamed of any harm to the old gentleman, who'd been my kindest friend." "I entirely believe you, madam," said Sherlock Holmes. "Perhaps it will make it easier if I tell you what occurred, and you can check me if I make a mistake. The sending of this letter was suggested to you by Stapleton." "He dictated it." "I presume the reason he gave was that you'd receive help from Sir Charles for the legal expenses connected with your divorce." "Exactly. But after I'd sent the letter, he told me that it would hurt his self-respect for any other man to give me the money, and that though he was a poor man, he would devote his last penny to removing the obstacles which divided us." "And after Sir Charles's death, he made you swear to say nothing about your appointment?" "He said that the death was a mysterious one, and that I should certainly be suspected if the facts came out. He frightened me into remaining silent." She blushed. "I think, on the whole," said Sherlock Holmes, "that you've had a fortunate escape." After we'd taken our leave, Holmes was quiet. One of his defects, if indeed one may call it a defect, was that he was exceedingly loath to communicate his full plans to anyone. I'd often suffered under it, but never more so than that evening when he suggested taking a drive on Dartmoor. A great ordeal was in front of us. At last we were about to make our final effort, and yet Holmes said nothing. and I could only surmise what his course of actions would be. My nerves thrilled with anticipation when I felt the cold wind on our faces, and the dark, void spaces told me we were back on the moor. When we reached the path to Meripit House, Holmes paid off the wagonette, and we walked cautiously along the track. I could just make out the gloomy slope of the hill, and a huge lake of fog which lay over the Grimpen mire. Holmes halted when we were about 200 yards from the house. "This will do. These rocks make an admirable screen. We'll make our ambush here. You've been inside the house, Watson. The blinds are up. Creep forward and see what they're doing. But for heaven's sake, don't let them know they're being watched." I tiptoed down the path and peeped through the uncurtained window. Sir Henry and Stapleton sat with their profiles towards me on either side of the table, smoking cigars. Stapleton was talking with animation, but the baronet looked pale. Perhaps the thought of that lonely walk across the moor was weighing heavily on his mind. As I watched them, Stapleton rose and left the room, while Sir Henry refilled his glass. I heard the creak of a door and the sound of boots on gravel. I crept after him and saw the naturalist unlock the door of an outhouse. There was a curious scuffling noise, and then he came out and went back to the house. I crept quietly back to where my companion was waiting. "You say, Watson, that the lady isn't there," said Holmes. As he spoke, the dense fog that hung over Grimpen Mire was drifting slowly in our direction. He tapped his foot impatiently. "It's moving towards us, Watson. It's already 10 o'clock. Our success, and even Sir Henry's life, may depend upon his coming out before the fog's over the path." Already, the first thin wisps of mist were curling across the golden square of the lighted window. As we watched, the fog wreaths came crawling round both corners of the house, and rolled slowly into one dense bank, on which the upper floor and the roof floated like a strange ship on a shadowy sea. Holmes put his ear to the ground. "Thank God, I think I hear him coming." A sound of quick steps broke the silence. Crouching behind our rock, we stared intently at the silver-tipped bank in front of us. Sir Henry emerged from the mist and passed close to where we lay. He continued swiftly up the long slope behind us, glancing continually over either shoulder. "Hist!" whispered Holmes, and I heard the sharp click of a cocking pistol. "Look out! It's coming." There was a thin, crisp, continuous patter from somewhere in the heart of the crawling bank of fog. What horror approached us? I glanced at Holmes's face. It was pale and exultant, his eyes shining brightly. But suddenly they froze in a rigid stare, and his lips parted in amazement. I sprang to my feet, my hand grasping my pistol, my mind paralyzed by the dreadful shape which had sprung from the shadows of the fog. A hound it was, an enormous coal-black hound, but not such a hound as mortal eyes have ever seen. Fire burst from its open mouth. Its eyes glowed with a smoldering glare. Its muzzle and hackles were outlined in flickering flame. Never, in the delirious dream of a disordered brain, could anything more appalling, more hellish, be conceived than that dark form which broke upon us. With long bounds, the huge creature was leaping down the track, following hard upon the footsteps of our friend. So paralyzed were we by the apparition that we allowed him to pass before we recovered our nerve. Then Holmes and I both fired together, and the creature gave a hideous howl. He didn't pause, however, but bounded onwards. Far away on the path, we saw Sir Henry, his face white in the moonlight, glaring helplessly at the frightful thing which was hunting him down. But that cry of pain from the hound had blown our fears to the winds. If he was vulnerable, he was mortal, and if we could wound him, we could kill him. Never have I seen a man run as Holmes ran that night. As we flew up the track, we heard scream after scream from Sir Henry, and the deep roar of the hound. I was in time to see the beast spring for its victim, but the next instant Holmes emptied 5 barrels of his revolver into the creature's flank. With a last howl of agony, it rolled onto its back, then fell limp on its side. Sir Henry stared at his foe. My God, what in heaven's name is it? In mere size and strength, it was a terrible creature which was lying stretched before us. Neither pure bloodhound nor pure mastiff, but a combination of the two, gaunt, savage, and as large as a lioness. Even now, in the stillness of death, the huge jaws seemed to be rippling with a bluish flame, and the cruel eyes were ringed with fire. I placed my hand on the glowing muzzle, and as I held them up, my own fingers gleamed in the darkness. Phosphorus, I said. Having ensured that Sir Henry wasn't hurt, we ran back to the house. The front door was open. No doubt warned by the shots, our foe had fled. Nevertheless, Holmes left no corner of the house unexplored. On the upper floor, one of the bedroom doors was locked. Holmes struck it with his foot, and it flew open. In the centre of the room, tied to an upright beam, was the figure of a woman. As we tore off the gags and bounds, we saw Miss Stapleton, the red wheal of a whiplash across her neck, bruises on her arms. She gave a sigh of satisfaction. "Oh, thank God, thank God!" To Holmes's entreaties she responded, "There's but one place he can have fled. There's an old tin mine on an island in the heart of the mire. It was there that he kept his hound. That's where he would fly." Holmes pointed to the fog at the window. No one could find his way into the Grimpen mire tonight. She laughed and clapped her hands. "He may have found his way in, but never out. He planted guiding wands to mark the pathway, but he'll never find them tonight." It was evident to us all that pursuit was in vain until the fog had lifted. In the morning, we were guided by Mrs. Stapleton to the pathway through the bog. It helped us realize the horror of this woman's life when we saw the eagerness with which she laid us on her husband's track. A small wand planted here and there showed where the path zigzagged from tuft to tuft among the foul quagmires. A false step plunged us more than once thigh-deep into the dark, quivering scum, which shook for yards in soft undulations around our feet. Once only we saw a trace that someone had passed that perilous way. From a tuft of cotton grass, Holmes plucked an old black boot. Myers, Toronto, was printed on the leather inside. Sir Henry's missing boot. Used, no doubt, to set the hound upon his scent. Stapleton must have fled, still clutching it. We know at least he came this far in safety. But more than that, we were never destined to know. There was no chance of finding footsteps in the mire, for the rising mud oozed swiftly in upon them. But as we reached firmer ground beyond the morass, we all searched eagerly. Not the slightest sign ever met our eyes. If the earth told a true story, then Stapleton never reached that island of refuge towards which he struggled through the fog that last night. Somewhere, in the heart of the great Grimpen mire, down in the foul slime of the huge morass which had sucked him in, this cold and cruel-hearted man is forever buried.
Hugh Laurie has been reading The Hound of the Baskervilles by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. The programme was abridged and produced for Radio 2 by Jane Marshall Productions.